A rookie's dream crushed. The bustling hum of Willow Creek Police Department was a symphony of chaos on Lily Carter's first day. A fresh-faced recruit with hazel eyes that burned with determination. She had been warned that the transition from academy training to real-life police work would be rough. But nothing could have prepared her for this. Chief Harold Davis's booming voice cut through the station like a blade. "Rookie, my office, now." Lily flinched but stood tall. She tightened her grip on the freshly polished badge, pinned to her chest, and stepped into the lion's den. Davis's office was a blend of clutter and intimidation, his towering frame seated behind a desk that seemed to groan under the weight of disorganized files. "You're late on your report from yesterday," Davis barked, his graying brows furrowed. "I wasn't assigned any," Lily began, but his glare silenced her. "No excuses. Around here, you pull your weight or you're out. Got it?" "Yes, sir," she replied, biting back her frustration. This wasn't the mentorship she had envisioned. Willow Creek had been her dream since childhood, a town that seemed picturesque with its cobblestone streets, seasonal festivals, and close-knit community. But beneath the surface lurked shadows no one talked about. Businesses targeted by precision burglaries, locals whispering about organized crime, and a police force that seemed more interested in keeping the peace than enforcing it. From the start, Lily had been handed the most menial of tasks: sorting evidence logs, fetching coffee, and filing paperwork. Her eagerness to prove herself was met with eye rolls and dismissive remarks from seasoned officers who seemed to view her as a placeholder. Chief Davis, in particular, seemed determined to see her fail. "You're too soft, Carter," he said during her first week. "Policing isn't about playing detective like in some storybook. It's about discipline." Despite the constant belittling, Lily remained undeterred. During her lunch breaks, she pored over case files and crime scene photos. It wasn't long before she began to notice patterns that others seemed to overlook. The recent string of burglaries was too calculated to be random. Businesses near the riverfront were targeted exclusively, and every heist coincided with heavy rain. These weren't coincidences, they were a method. But when she approached Chief Davis with her findings, his response was ice-cold. "Rookie, leave the thinking to the detectives. That's not your job." Humiliated, she retreated to her desk, feeling the weight of her peers' stares. Some looked at her with sympathy, others with amusement, but no one offered support. As the days passed, her frustration grew. The burglaries were escalating, yet the department seemed content to let the case grow cold. One evening, as rain lashed against the windows, Lily sat alone at her desk, reviewing her notes. She replayed the conversation she had with Joe, a retired trucker who frequented Lucy's diner. His cryptic words lingered in her mind. "You ever wonder why they can't catch that thief? Maybe they're looking in the wrong place." Fueled by Joe's hint, Lily decided to visit the crime scenes herself. After hours when the streets were silent and the rain masked her movements, she roamed the riverfront. It didn't take long before she stumbled across something unusual: faint tire tracks on a dirt path obscured by overgrown bushes near one of the burglarized stores. Following the tracks, she found herself at a secluded spot near the river. The air was thick with the smell of damp earth, and her heart raced as she crouched to examine the scene. The tracks were fresh, likely from a vehicle used during the last burglary. It wasn't much, but it was a start. She snapped photos with her phone and returned to the station, determined to present her findings the next day. When morning came, Lily approached Chief Davis with renewed resolve. She placed the photos on his desk, her voice steady despite the pounding in her chest. "Chief, I believe I found a lead. These tracks were near the riverfront. They might belong to..." "Enough," Davis's voice thundered, cutting her off. He shoved the photos aside without so much as a glance. "You're overstepping your bounds, Carter. This isn't your case." "But Chief..." "I said enough." His fist slammed against the desk. "One more stunt like this, and you're off the force." The words stung like a slap, but Lily refused to back down. That night, As she walked home in the rain, the weight of Davis's dismissal hung heavy on her shoulders. Yet beneath her frustration was a spark of defiance. If the department wasn't willing to solve this case, she would do it on her own. Lily spent the next few nights visiting the riverfront, mapping out every detail she could find. The tire tracks led to a dirt road hidden behind the old cannery, a long-abandoned building that seemed forgotten by the town. It was there, under the cover of night, that she caught her first real glimpse of the operation. A shadowy figure loaded crates into a sleek black car parked near the cannery's entrance. Their movements were precise and hurried, as though they were racing against time. Lily's heart raced as she snapped a photo, careful not to make a sound. But as the car sped off into the darkness, she knew she couldn't keep this discovery to herself. She returned to the station, her clothes soaked, and her determination unwavering. "Chief Davis, I saw them," she said, bursting into his office. "The burglars. They're using the cannery as a hideout." Davis didn't even look up from his paperwork. "Carter, you're done here." The room fell silent as the weight of his words sank in. "What?" Lily whispered. "You're off the case," he said, his tone final. "Turn in your badge." A lump formed in her throat, but she refused to let him see her falter. Without a word, she unpinned her badge and placed it on his desk. As she walked out of the station for what felt like the last time, Lily made a vow to herself. If no one else was willing to fight for Willow Creek, she would. With or without a badge, she was determined to bring the truth to light. Shadows and clues. Rain cascaded down in heavy sheets as Lily Carter stood at the edge of the Willow Creek riverfront, her hood barely protecting her from the cold. The dim streetlights flickered, casting fleeting shadows over the cobblestone streets. She had traded her official badge for a quiet determination that burned brighter with every obstacle Chief Davis had thrown her way. Dismissed but not defeated, Lily had made a promise to herself. This case would be solved, no matter what it took. The old cannery loomed ahead, a ghost of its former self. Its rusted walls and shattered windows gave it a foreboding aura, but it also made the perfect hideout. Lily clenched her flashlight tightly as she approached, her boots crunching on the gravel road. She had spent hours piecing together the puzzle from the evidence she'd collected. The riverfront burglaries were more than random thefts. They were calculated, precise, and connected to something bigger. All roads pointed here. As she circled the building, Lily's sharp eyes caught fresh tire tracks in the mud, leading to a back entrance partially obscured by overgrown bushes. She crouched down, running her fingers along the grooves. The tracks were distinct from a heavy-duty vehicle, a van, or a truck. This wasn't just a petty criminal operation. They had resources, and that made them dangerous. Her heart raced as she approached the door. It was slightly ajar, creaking softly in the wind. She hesitated for a moment, gripping the taser she'd kept from her police days. Stepping inside, she was met with the stale smell of rust and mildew. The cavernous interior was eerily quiet, save for the faint dripping of water from the ceiling. Her flashlight's beam danced across abandoned machinery and piles of debris. As she moved deeper into the building, Lily spotted faint scuff marks on the floor. She crouched again, her fingers tracing over them. Someone had been here recently, dragging something heavy. She followed the marks, which led to a section of the floor that was unnaturally clean compared to the surrounding grime. She tapped the area with her foot, and a hollow sound echoed back. Lily crouched down, running her hand over the surface. It was a trapdoor, cleverly camouflaged, to blend in with the factory floor. Her breath caught as she tried to pry it open, but it wouldn't budge. She needed a tool, or more strength. Frustration bubbled in her chest, but she forced herself to remain calm. This was a significant find, but she couldn't act recklessly. Suddenly, a faint sound reached her ears, muffled voices. Lily froze, her flashlight clicking off in an instant. She pressed herself against the wall, her heart hammering in her chest. The voices grew louder, accompanied by the faint scrape of something metallic. "Move it to the van. We're behind schedule," one voice grumbled. Relax, another replied. Storm's got everyone inside. No one's watching. Lily peered around the corner, careful to stay in the shadows. Two figures moved through the dim light, carrying a crate between them. She strained to get a better view, but couldn't make out their faces. They'd moved with practiced efficiency, their steps deliberate. These weren't amateurs. Her phone buzzed in her pocket, startling her. She fumbled to silence it, but the faint vibration drew the attention of one of the men. He paused, setting the crate down as his eyes scanned the darkness. "You hear that?" he asked. The other man grunted. "Probably just rats. Let's get this done." Lily stayed motionless, barely daring to breathe as the men continued their work. She needed to document this. Evidence was her only weapon now. Carefully, she raised her phone and snapped a photo, the faint click almost lost in the patter of rain on the roof. When the men finally left, their voices fading into the distance, Lily exhaled the breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. She stepped out from her hiding spot, her pulse still racing. This was a breakthrough, but it also made her a target. Whoever these men were, they wouldn't take kindly to someone prying into their operation. Back at her small apartment, Lily locked the door and double-checked the windows. The photo she'd taken of the men with the crates stared back at her from her laptop screen. The image was grainy, but the silhouettes were clear enough to be damning. She spent hours analyzing it, cross-referencing the details with notes she'd compiled from the burglary reports. Patterns emerged. The timing of the heists during storms, the locations near the riverfront, and now, the cannery. This wasn't just about stealing. It was about logistics. The cannery was a hub, a place where stolen goods were sorted and distributed. But for whom? And why? Her phone buzzed again, pulling her out of her thoughts. It was Joe, the old man from the diner who had dropped cryptic hints before. She hesitated before answering. "Joe," she said cautiously. "You've been busy," he replied, his voice low and serious. "What do you mean?" "Word gets around, kid. You poking your nose into the cannery ain't gone unnoticed. They're watching you now." A chill ran down her spine. "Who's they?" Joe sighed. "The people you don't want to mess with. But I figure you already know that." Lily clenched her jaw. "I'm not backing down." "Didn't think you would," Joe said. "Look, if you're serious about this, meet me tomorrow at the scrapyard on Route 17. There's someone you need to talk to." The call ended abruptly, leaving Lily with more questions than answers. She leaned back in her chair, staring at the notes scattered across her desk. The pieces were coming together, but the picture they formed was far more sinister than she'd imagined. The next morning, Lily drove out to the scrapyard, her eyes scanning the horizon for any signs of trouble. The sprawling lot was a chaotic maze of rusted cars and towering piles of metal. A man leaned against an old pickup truck near the entrance, his grease-stained hoodie pulled low over his face. "You Carter?" the man asked as she approached. "Yeah," Lily replied, her hand hovering near her taser. "Joe said you might know something." The man smirked, lighting a cigarette. "Name's Eddie. And yeah, I know plenty. Question is, how much you want to know." "I'm trying to stop these burglaries," Lily said. "But it's bigger than that, isn't it?" Eddie exhaled a plume of smoke, his sharp eyes narrowing. "Bigger's one way to put it. You've stumbled into something way over your head, rookie. The cannery's just a drop in the bucket. They're moving shipments, drugs, weapons, stolen goods, and they've got someone on the inside." Lily's stomach tightened. "Someone in the department." Eddie nodded. "And it ain't just anyone. It's someone high up. Real high." Chief Davis's dismissive words and cold glares flashed through her mind. Could it be him? The thought made her blood run cold, but it also made sense. "Do you have proof?" she asked. Eddie smirked again. "Proof? Nah. But I can point you in the right direction. You're looking for a black sedan, tinted windows, no plates. It's been spotted near the cannery during storms, same as those heists you're so interested in." "Where can I find it?" Lily pressed. Eddie tossed his cigarette to the ground and crushed it under his boot. That's the thing about shadows, Carter. They move when you're not looking. Before she could ask more, Eddie walked away, disappearing into the labyrinth of rusted metal. Lily clenched her fists, frustration bubbling inside her. She was closer to the truth, but the closer she got, the more dangerous it became. As she drove back into town, her phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. "Stop digging, or you'll regret it." Her grip tightened on the wheel. Fear gnawed at the edges of her resolve, but she pushed it aside. The shadows were closing in, but she wasn't about to back down. This wasn't just about solving a case anymore. It was personal. The warning. The sky was overcast as Lily Carter pulled into the quiet parking lot of Lucy's diner. The buzz of the threatening message she'd received earlier still rang in her ears. "Stop digging, or you'll regret it." It was an all-too-clear sign that her investigation wasn't flying under the radar anymore. Someone was watching, and they wanted her to stop before she unearthed the truth. The warm light from the diner's windows spilled into the dreary gray of the afternoon. Lily glanced around, her hazel eyes scanning every shadow and parked car for anything or anyone suspicious. Satisfied, at least for the moment, that she wasn't being watched, she slid out of her car and entered the diner. Joe was already there, seated in his usual booth near the back. His face was set in a serious expression, his fingers absently tapping the edge of his coffee cup. He looked up as Lily approached, nodding toward the seat across from him. "Got your message," she said, sitting down and leaning in. "What's so urgent?" Joe didn't answer immediately. He glanced around, ensuring no one was close enough to overhear, before lowering his voice. "You've stirred the hornet's nest, kid. That message you got, that's not just a scare tactic. They mean it." Lily clenched her fists beneath the table. "Good. Let them come. I'm not backing down." Joe sighed, rubbing a hand over his face. "You don't get it. This isn't just some two-bit gang you're dealing with. These people don't play fair, and they've got deep roots in this town." "You mean Chief Davis," Lily said, her voice hardening. Joe hesitated, then nodded slowly. "Yeah, Davis is part of it, but he's just a cog in a much bigger machine. I've been keeping my eyes open, listening to the right folks. Word is, there's someone even higher up pulling the strings." "Who?" Lily demanded. Joe shook his head. "I don't know. But whoever they are, they're smart. Everything's compartmentalized. Davis runs the local operation, but the orders come from above." Lily leaned back, her mind racing. She thought back to her encounters with Davis, the way he dismissed her findings, his anger when she got too close to the truth. It all fit. He wasn't just ignoring her investigation. He was actively trying to derail it. "Joel, if I don't stop this, no one will," she said firmly. "Do you have anything else? Any leads?" Joe took a sip of his coffee, then nodded. "Eddie gave you something about a black sedan, right? Well, I've seen it too. Comes through town during storms, always late at night. Last time, it drove out to the old warehouse district near the tracks." Lily frowned. "The warehouse district? That place has been abandoned for years." "Yeah, but it's quiet, out of sight. Perfect place for them to stash whatever they're moving." Lily's jaw tightened. "Then that's where I'm going next." Joe grabbed her wrist, his grip firm but not harsh. "Kid, listen to me. They're already watching you. Going out there alone is suicide." "I don't have a choice," she said, pulling her hand free. "If I wait, they'll cover their tracks." Joe sighed again, shaking his head. "You've got guts, Carter. I'll give you that. But if you're going out there, at least take this." He reached into his coat and pulled out a small revolver, placing it on the table. Lily stared at it. "Joe, I can't." "You're not a cop anymore," he interrupted. "You don't have backup, and you sure as hell don't have the department's resources. If things go south, you'll need this." Reluctantly, Lily took the gun, slipping it into her bag. "Thanks, Joe." "Just promise me you'll be careful," he said, his voice softer now. "This town doesn't need another tragedy." She nodded, though the weight of his words settled heavily in her chest. As she left the diner, the revolver a constant reminder of the danger ahead, she couldn't help but feel the walls closing in around her. The warehouse district was as desolate as Lily expected. Crumbling buildings lined the streets, their windows shattered, and their walls tagged with graffiti. Weeds sprouted through cracks in the pavement, and the air smelled faintly of oil and decay. Lily parked her car a few blocks away and approached on foot, her heart pounding in her chest. She clutched her flashlight in one hand and Joe's revolver in the other, her senses on high alert. The warehouse Eddie had mentioned stood at the far end of the district, its towering structure casting long shadows in the fading light. As Lily got closer, she noticed a faint glow coming from one of the upper windows. Someone was inside. She crept along the side of the building, searching for an entrance. The main doors were padlocked, but a smaller side door hung ajar. She slipped inside, her footsteps echoing softly in the cavernous space. The interior was a maze of rusted machinery and stacked crates, some marked with cryptic symbols, others completely unmarked. Lily moved cautiously, her flashlight's beam cutting through the darkness. As she rounded a corner, she froze. Voices drifted toward her, low and urgent. She crouched behind a stack of crates, peering through a narrow gap. Two men stood near a table covered in papers and a laptop. One of them was holding a phone, speaking rapidly into it. "She's poking around too much," he said, his voice sharp. "We need to deal with her before she brings the heat." Lily's stomach twisted. They were talking about her. "Davis said to hold off," the other man replied. "He thinks she'll burn herself out." "Davis is an idiot," the first man snapped. "She's already figured out more than she should. If she connects the dots to the shipments, it's over." The mention of Davis confirmed her suspicions. The chief wasn't just complicit, he was directly involved. But the conversation hinted at something even bigger. Shipments. This wasn't just about burglaries. It was a full-blown smuggling operation. Lily pulled out her phone and started recording. This was the evidence she needed. But as she adjusted her angle to get a clearer view, her flashlight clipped the edge of a crate, sending it toppling to the ground with a loud crash. The men spun around, their eyes narrowing as they spotted her. "Who's there?" one of them barked. Lily bolted, her heart hammering in her chest. She weaved through the maze of crates, the men's shouts and pounding footsteps echoing behind her. She reached the side door and burst outside, the cool night air hitting her face. But before she could make it to her car, a hand clamped down on her shoulder, spinning her around. One of the men stood before her, his face twisted in anger. "End of the line," he snarled, raising a crowbar. Lily's training kicked in. She ducked, the crowbar swinging harmlessly over her head, and shoved him backward. He stumbled, but before she could make her escape, the second man appeared, blocking her path. She reached into her bag, pulling out the revolver. "Back off," she shouted, her voice trembling but firm. The men hesitated, their eyes flicking to the gun. For a moment, it seemed like they might back down, but then headlights swept over the scene, and a black sedan screeched to a stop nearby. "Get in," a voice barked from the car. The men retreated, jumping into the sedan as it sped off into the night. Lily stood frozen for a moment, her breath coming in ragged gasps. She'd escaped, but just barely. As she made her way back to her car, her mind raced. The smuggling ring, Davis's involvement, the black sedan, everything was coming together. But the closer she got to the truth, the more dangerous it became. Lily tightened her grip on the revolver. This wasn't just about solving a case anymore. This was war. Striking back, the rain began again as Lily Carter parked her car in an abandoned lot near the edge of town. The distant sound of thunder rolled through the darkened sky, a fitting backdrop to the storm brewing in her own life. She had spent the last 2 days piecing together the fragments of evidence she had gathered. The smuggling operation centered at the old cannery and warehouse, the black sedan, the cryptic mention of shipments, and most damning, Chief Davis's involvement. Her next move was clear. She needed to make this bigger than Davis could control. If she could get the evidence into the hands of someone beyond Willow Creek, someone who couldn't be corrupted, it might just be enough to take him down. But first, she needed access to Davis's office. Lily had spent hours outside the station, studying the building, watching the patterns of the officers on duty. She wasn't proud of what she was about to do, breaking into the place she once dreamed of serving, but it was necessary. The truth was worth the risk. The station was quieter than usual, the rain driving most of the officers into their break rooms. Lily slipped through the side alley, avoiding the security cameras she knew were outdated and poorly maintained. She timed this perfectly. The evening shift change meant the station was in a brief lull. Using the access code she'd memorized during her first week on the job, Lily opened the side door and slipped inside. Her heart pounded as she moved through the dimly lit hallways, her boots making the barest of sounds on the tiled floor. Davis's office was at the far end of the building, past the bullpen where most of the officers worked. She avoided the main path, instead weaving through the archive room and storage areas. The dim glow of the emergency lights cast eerie shadows on the walls, but she pushed the unease aside. She had a job to do. Finally, she reached Davis's office. The door was locked, as she expected. She pulled out a small toolkit she bought earlier that day, her hands trembling slightly as she worked to pick the lock. Each click of the mechanism echoed in her ears, louder than the rain pounding against the windows. When the lock finally gave, Lily pushed the door open and slipped inside, closing it quietly behind her. The office smelled of stale coffee and damp paper. Davis's desk was cluttered with files and reports, a chaotic mess that mirrored his temperamental nature. Lily began her search, combing through the papers and drawers with careful precision. She was looking for anything, emails, transaction records, anything that could link Davis to the smuggling ring. Her hands moved quickly but methodically, her adrenaline fueling her focus. After several minutes of searching, she found it, a black binder tucked away in the bottom drawer of the desk. Inside were handwritten notes, schedules, and names, many of which she recognized as local business owners and suppliers. But what caught her attention most were the coordinates scribbled in the margins, paired with dates and times. Lily's breath hitched. These weren't just notes. They were logs of the smuggling operation, delivery points, pickup times, and coded messages that tied Davis directly to the network. She took photos of every page, her phone's camera capturing the evidence she needed. She was just about to put the binder back when a voice startled her. "What the hell are you doing in here?" Lily spun around, her heart leaping into her throat. Standing in the doorway was Officer Ben Harper, one of the few colleagues who had ever shown her any kindness. His expression was a mix of shock and confusion. "Ben," she whispered, lowering her phone. "I can explain." "You'd better," he said, stepping into the room and closing the door behind him. "Because breaking into the chief's office isn't exactly standard procedure." Lily hesitated, weighing her options. Ben had always been decent to her, but could she trust him with this? Finally, she decided to take the risk. "Davis is dirty," she said, her voice low but firm. "He's involved in a smuggling operation. I have proof." Ben's brows furrowed. "What are you talking about?" "Smuggling." Lily held up her phone, showing him the photos she'd just taken. "This binder connects him to the operation. I've seen the players firsthand. Davis is pulling the strings, and he's working for someone bigger." Ben stared at the screen, his face unreadable. For a moment, Lily thought he might call for backup or try to arrest her. But then he sighed, running a hand through his hair. "Damn it, Carter," he muttered. "If what you're saying is true, you're in way over your head." "I know," she replied. "That's why I need help." Ben nodded slowly. "All right. But if we're going to do this, we have to be smart about it. Davis has friends everywhere. If he catches wind of this, You're dead." Lily's chest tightened. "What do you suggest?" Ben glanced at the binder, then back at her. "We need to get this to someone outside the department. State police, maybe even the feds. But first, we have to get out of here without anyone noticing." As they left Davis's office, the tension between them was palpable. Ben led the way, his demeanor calm but alert. Lily followed closely, clutching her phone like a lifeline. They made it to the side door without incident, but just as they stepped outside, headlights swept over them. The black sedan pulled into the lot, its windows tinted and its engine humming ominously. "Get down," Ben hissed, pulling Lily behind a stack of crates near the loading dock. The car idled for a moment before the driver's door opened. A man stepped out, tall and broad-shouldered, his face obscured by the shadows. He looked around, his posture tense, before pulling out a phone and making a call. "She was in the office," he said, his voice low but angry. "I'm telling you, she knows too much. We have to move now." Lily's blood ran cold. They weren't just after her. They knew she had found something. Ben's grip on her arm tightened. "We have to go. Now." He led her to his car, parked at the far end of the lot. They climbed in, and Ben started the engine, pulling out onto the main road just as the sedan's driver turned back toward the station. "Where are we going?" Lily asked, her voice trembling. "To someone who can help," Ben replied, his jaw set. "But it's a long shot." As they sped through the rain-soaked streets, Lily couldn't shake the feeling that their every move was being watched. The storm wasn't just outside anymore. It was all around her, and she was at its center. But if she learned anything in the last few days, it was this: the only way to fight back was to keep moving forward. Allies in the shadows. The rain pounded relentlessly as Ben Harper's car sped through the winding backroads of Willow Creek. The rhythmic thudding of the windshield wipers did little to calm Lily's nerves. Every passing car, every faint shadow cast by the headlights, made her jump. They had escaped the station, but she knew they were far from safe. The black sit-in's driver knew she had the evidence. It was only a matter of time before they caught up. "Where are we going?" Lily asked, gripping the binder she'd recovered from Davis's office. Ben's eyes stayed on the road, his jaw tight. "There's someone I trust, a retired detective named Frank. He lives off the grid, deep in the woods. He's not the kind of guy who plays politics, and he knows how to handle situations like this. Are you sure we can trust him?" she pressed. Ben glanced at her briefly, his expression unreadable. "I wouldn't be taking you to him if I wasn't. Frank's the reason I joined the force in the first place. If anyone can help us figure out the next step, it's him." The car turned onto a narrow dirt road, the trees on either side forming a dense canopy that made it feel like they were descending into another world. The headlights barely penetrated the darkness ahead, but Ben seemed to know the path well. After what felt like an eternity, they reached a small clearing. A modest cabin sat at its center, its wooden exterior weathered by time and the elements. The only sign of life was the faint glow of a lantern flickering through the front window. Ben parked the car and cut the engine. "Stay close," he said, stepping out and scanning the area before gesturing for Lily to follow. The moment they approached the door, it opened. A tall, broad-shouldered man stood in the doorway, his grizzled face partially obscured by a thick beard. His piercing blue eyes locked onto Lily, then shifted to Ben. "Harper," the man said, his voice low and gravelly. "You look like you've been through hell." "You have no idea, Frank," Ben replied. "We need your help." Frank stepped aside, letting them in. The cabin's interior was simple but functional, with mismatched furniture and a roaring fireplace that cast dancing shadows across the walls. A table in the corner was covered with maps, tools, and a weathered laptop. As Lily entered, Frank's sharp eyes studied her. "Who's this?" "Lily Carter," Ben said. "She's got evidence tying Chief Davis to a smuggling operation, but the people running it know she's onto them, and they won't stop until they shut her down." Frank arched an eyebrow, crossing his arms. "Smuggling? Davis? didn't think he had the brains for that. He's not the mastermind, Lily said, stepping forward. He's taking orders from someone higher up. We don't know who yet, but this, she held up the binder, connects him to everything. Frank motioned for her to sit at the table and gestured toward the binder. Let's see what you've got. Lily spread the pages out, explaining the coded logs, the meeting coordinates, and the cryptic references to shipments. Frank listened intently, his expression darkening with every detail. This is bad, he muttered, running a hand through his beard. Davis is small-time compared to whoever's behind this. You're talking about a network, organized crime, likely across state lines. That's what I figured, Lily said. But I don't know who to trust. If Davis has people inside the department, I can't go back there. Frank nodded. Smart move. You'd be dead before you reached the parking lot. Whoever's running this operation has eyes everywhere. Ben leaned forward, his voice urgent. So what do we do? We need to take this higher. State police, maybe even the feds. Not yet, Frank said firmly. You send this up the chain too soon, and it'll leak. Davis or whoever's pulling his strings will bury it. We need more. Something irrefutable. Lily's frustration boiled over. We don't have time for that. They already know I have this. They torched my house, for God's sake. What else do they need to do before we act? Frank met her gaze, his expression steady but intense. I get it, kid. You want to nail them now, but you're playing against pros. If you rush this, they'll find you, and they'll make sure you disappear. You want to bring them down. You do it right. Lily clenched her fists, her nails digging into her palms. She knew he was right, but every second felt like borrowed time. She took a deep breath, forcing herself to focus. Okay, what's the plan? Frank picked up one of the maps from the table, spreading it out. It was a detailed layout of the old warehouse district and the surrounding areas. He pointed to a marked spot near the train tracks. If this is where they're operating out of, they'll have backups, ledgers, records, maybe even physical evidence of what they're moving. We get in, grab whatever we can, and get out. That's risky, Ben said. If they catch us, we're done. It's always risky, Frank replied. But you've got the element of surprise. They won't expect you to hit their main base. Lily studied the map, her mind racing. We'll need to move fast. If they know I've been digging, they'll already be covering their tracks. Frank smirked faintly. Then it's a good thing I know how to work fast. Hours later, under the cover of darkness, Lily, Ben, and Frank arrived at the edge of the warehouse district. The rain had subsided, but the ground was still slick and muddy. The buildings loomed like silent sentinels, their broken windows and crumbling walls hiding secrets within. Frank handed Lily and Ben earpieces, his tone all business. We go in quiet. No unnecessary risks. Lily, you stay close to me. Ben, you cover the back entrance. If anything goes sideways, we regroup at the truck. Got it, Ben said, checking his sidearm. Lily nodded, clutching Joe's revolver tightly. Her pulse raced as they crept toward the warehouse, her every nerve on edge. Frank led the way, his movements surprisingly agile for someone his size. They reached the main entrance, a rusted metal door that hung slightly ajar. Frank gestured for them to stop, then peered inside. After a moment, he waved them forward. The interior was eerily quiet. Rows of crates lined the walls, some marked with shipping labels, others completely blank. Lily scanned the room, her flashlight illuminating faint scuff marks on the floor, signs of heavy movement. This way, Frank whispered, motioning toward a staircase at the back of the warehouse. As they ascended, the faint hum of voices reached their ears. Lily's stomach tightened. They weren't alone. Frank held up a hand, signaling for them to stop. He crouched low, peeking over the railing. Below, two men stood near a desk covered in papers, their conversation low but urgent. We need to move everything tonight, one of them said. The boss doesn't want anything left behind. "The storm's slowing us down," the other replied. "Tell him to relax." Frank turned back to Lily and Ben, his voice barely audible. "This is our shot. Grab what you can from that desk and get out." Before Lily could respond, the sound of a door slamming echoed through the warehouse. All three froze as a familiar voice cut through the tension. "What the hell is taking so long?" Lily's blood ran cold. Chief Davis had arrived. The reckoning. The sound of Chief Davis's voice echoed through the cavernous warehouse, sharp and commanding. Lily's heart thudded against her ribs, her grip on the revolver tightening. This was no longer a game of shadows. Davis was here, in the flesh, and his presence only confirmed the depths of his involvement. Frank crouched beside her, his expression grim. "Change of plans," he whispered. "We're not just here to collect evidence anymore. If we can get Davis talking, it's game over." Ben's voice crackled through their earpieces. "I can cut them off at the back entrance if you want to funnel them toward you." "Negative," Frank replied. "We're not risking a firefight. Hold your position and keep an eye out for reinforcements." Lily took a deep breath, steadying her nerves. This was her moment. The evidence she had gathered so far was crucial, but if she could get Davis to implicate himself, it would seal his fate and the entire operation. The group moved closer, their footsteps silent on the metal staircase. From their vantage point above the main floor, they had a clear view of Davis standing near the desk. He wore his usual scowl, his hands planted firmly on his hips as he barked orders at the men beneath him. "We're out of time," Davis snapped, his voice cutting through the rain dripping through the broken ceiling. "The girl's onto us, and I won't let her drag me down with this operation. Everything needs to be gone by sunrise." One of the men hesitated, shuffling nervously. "What about the shipments?" "We can't move it all in one night." "Then burn what you can't move," Davis growled. "And if she shows up, take her out. No loose ends." Lily's stomach churned. The calm, collected facade Davis always wore at the station was gone, replaced by a man desperate to salvage his crumbling empire. She motioned to Frank, whispering, "We have to record this." Frank nodded, pulling out a small recording device and setting it to capture Davis's incriminating words. "You really think the feds won't connect you to this if they find it burned?" one of the men asked, his tone skeptical. Davis rounded on him, his glare enough to silence any further protest. "The boss will handle the feds, like always. You just do your damn job." Lily felt a chill run down her spine. The boss, the mysterious figure above Davis, the one pulling all the strings. Whoever they were, their power extended far beyond Willow Creek. Frank motioned for Lily to follow as he began descending the staircase. She hesitated for a moment, fear threatening to take hold, but she forced herself to move. She had come too far to back down now. Frank's boots hit the floor with barely a sound, but the subtle creak of metal was enough to draw Davis's attention. He turned sharply, his hand moving to the sidearm holstered at his hip. "Who the hell?" Davis began, but the words died on his lips as he recognized Lily stepping into the dim light, her revolver raised. "Evening, Chief," she said, her voice steady despite the hammering of her heart. "Nice little operation you've got here." Davis's eyes narrowed, his jaw tightening. "Carter," he spat, "you just don't know when to quit, do you?" "You made sure I didn't have a badge anymore," she shot back. "But you couldn't take away my determination. I know everything, Davis, the smuggling, the cover-ups, the threats. It's over." Davis barked a laugh, though it was devoid of humor. "You think you can bring me down with what you know? You're out of your league, rookie." Lily took a step closer, the revolver unwavering in her hand. "Maybe I am, but I got evidence, plenty of it. And I'm not the only one who knows." Frank stepped out of the shadows then, his presence commanding. "She's not alone, Davis." The chief's face darkened, his eyes flicking between Lily and Frank. "Harper, too. How many of you are in on this?" "Enough," Frank said coolly. "You've been sloppy, Davis, sloppy enough to get caught." Davis's men began to shift uncomfortably, their confidence waning in the face of the unexpected confrontation. One of them muttered something about reinforcements, but Davis silenced him with a glare. "You're bluffing," Davis said, his voice dripping with venom. "If you had enough to take me down, you'd already be in cuffs." "That's where you're wrong," Lily said, pulling her phone from her pocket. She tapped the screen, playing back the recording of Davis's earlier orders. His voice filled the warehouse, damning and undeniable. Davis's expression faltered for the first time, the weight of his situation sinking in. But then his hand darted to his gun, his eyes blazing with desperation. "Drop it," Frank barked, raising his rifle. "You so much as twitch, and this ends badly for you." For a tense moment, the air in the warehouse felt electric. Then Davis froze, his hand slowly moving away from his weapon. The fight in his eyes hadn't dimmed, but he knew he was cornered. "You don't understand what you're messing with," he said, his voice low. "The boss won't let this slide. You think you've won, but you're just scratching the surface." "Then let us scratch," Lily said, stepping closer. "Because one way or another, this ends tonight." The sound of approaching sirens cut through the night, their wails growing louder with each passing second. Davis's men panicked, dropping their weapons and scattering toward the exits. Davis himself didn't move, his shoulders slumping in defeat as Frank and Ben closed in to restrain him. By the time the state police arrived, the warehouse was surrounded. Officers stormed the building, securing the crates and detaining the remaining suspects. Lily watched as Davis was led away in handcuffs, his glare burning into her as he passed. "This isn't over, Carter," he snarled. "You have no idea what's coming." Lily held her ground, her chin raised. "Neither do you." As the chaos began to settle, one of the state detectives approached her, a look of admiration mixed with curiosity on his face. "You've done a hell of a job here, Miss Carter. We'll take it from here." Lily nodded, exhaustion finally washing over her. She handed over the binder and the recordings, knowing she had done everything she could to expose the corruption in Willow Creek. But as she stood amidst the flashing lights and bustling officers, she couldn't shake Davis's final warning. The fight wasn't over. The boss was still out there, watching, waiting. But for the first time in weeks, Lily felt hope. She had faced the shadows and come out standing. And she knew, no matter what came next, she wouldn't face it alone. Lily stood amidst the chaos of the raid, the cold night air wrapping around her like a shroud. Davis had been taken into custody, his sneering threats still ringing in her ears. She couldn't deny the knot of unease in her chest. Whoever this boss was, they were still out there, powerful and unrelenting. As the last of Davis's men were loaded into squad cars, Detective Martinez from the state police approached her. His sharp eyes carried both gratitude and a faint edge of concern. "Carter," he said, offering a hand, "I've reviewed some of the evidence you provided. You've done something remarkable here." "Thanks," she replied, shaking his hand. But Davis isn't the end of this. He was taking orders from someone bigger. Martinez nodded. "I've read the logs and the messages. This operation extends far beyond Willow Creek. It's going to take time to follow the trail, but we'll get there." Lily's jaw tightened. "Time isn't something we have. The boss knows we're onto them, and they won't just sit back and wait." "Then you've done your part," Martinez said gently. "Let us handle the rest." But Lily couldn't shake the feeling that the fight wasn't over. What about the shipments Davis mentioned? If there's still moving product, people will keep getting hurt. "We'll mobilize teams to secure the locations you identified," Martinez assured her. "Your work has given us a head start." It wasn't enough to ease her mind, but Lily nodded. She handed over the last of her notes and recordings, watching as the state police packed up the evidence. As the activity around her began to die down, she realized just how exhausted she was. The weight of the past few days bore down on her, and her adrenaline was finally ebbing away. Frank and Ben approached her, their faces lined with relief and exhaustion. Frank clapped her on the shoulder. You did good, kid. Better than most would have under the circumstances. Lily managed a small smile. Thanks, but I couldn't have done it without you. Ben gave her a wry grin. You're tougher than you look, Carter. I knew that from the start. She chuckled softly, shaking her head. I'm not sure if that's a compliment or an insult. 2 weeks later, the storm in Willow Creek had passed, leaving a town shaken but on the mend. The state police investigation had uncovered damning evidence against Davis, who now sat in a high-security facility awaiting trial. His operation was dismantled, but whispers of the elusive boss still lingered, a shadow on the edge of every conversation. Lily found herself back at Lucy's diner, the familiar smell of coffee and pancakes offering a brief sense of normalcy. She sipped her drink in silence, her thoughts drifting to everything that had transpired. The town she had once dreamed of serving had shown its darkest side, but it also revealed her strength and resilience. Joe slid into the booth across from her, his usual twinkle of mischief subdued. You look like you've got the weight of the world on your shoulders, kid. Maybe just Willow Creek's, Lily replied with a faint smile. They'll be all right, Joe said. And so will you. Do you think it's really over? She asked, her voice soft. The boss is still up there. I can't shake the feeling they'll come back. Joe leaned back, his gaze steady. Maybe they will, but you've proven you can handle yourself. And you've got people who believe in you now. Lily nodded slowly, her resolve hardening. The fight wasn't truly over, but she wasn't the same rookie who had walked into the Willow Creek Police Department weeks ago. She was stronger, wiser, and unafraid to stand against the darkness. As she left the diner and stepped into the crisp evening air, she felt a sense of peace. She had faced betrayal, danger, and corruption, and she had come out on the other side. The shadows might return, but she knew she would be ready. For now, that was enough.